Okay, now the other thing that's going on, while the cattle are doing this with their mouths, they are also dunging, urinating, and trampling. Now, you watch cattle grazing, and they walk very gently. And they put their feet very gently. Now, they will do that until their behavior changes. And you're the same. You know, I spent an unfortunate long period of my life tracking humans, and I tell you that when we're tracking you, we can work out your mental state from how you put your feet. If you are cool, calm, collected, well-fed, well-watered, you will walk across the land and you will not put your foot on this. You'll put your foot next to it. If we're tracking you and we see your foot's gone on that, what's it telling us? Whoops, this guy's lost, or he's panicking, something's happening. We're picking that up, okay? It's the same with cattle, same with deer, same with anything. So the state of mind or the behavior of the animal is affecting how its feet go. And now what happens on the land with the standard practice is, and you'll see it, there are cattle out there, but they're spread and they're calm and they're walking like this. So the land is resting. That's the soil, and the bulk of the plants are resting. Now, to break that rest, you have to get the behavior change in the animals. Now, we can get the behavior change by crowding them, just like you. You're all comfortable at the moment, but do you see how you spaced yourselves? Now, if I come to you two, and I do this, aren't you uncomfortable?
It's kind of cozy.
Yeah. As soon as you get into the body space, they'll get uncomfortable, and their feet action will change. The same with the cattle. So we can do it by concentrating them, and that's how some people do, and we call that stock density. Or we can do it by herd effect. That just means they're running in a big herd, and somewhere they'll be bunching. Somewhere they'll be doing this. They'll be crossing the river or crossing the gully or coming excited around the salt, and their behavior will be changing. So we've got to do something there to stop that rest effect, because that's what's going to lead to this if we can't stop it. Now, most people will tell you the brush is due to overgrazing, and we had a beautiful example in my country, because we had the whole country divided roughly into half, okay? Half of it was black farmers, 6 million. Half of it was white farmers, 6,000. Okay, very fair system. I would go and talk to my agricultural trainer. I had no training in agriculture. I'm a wildlifer. I would go and talk to my agricultural friends and I'd say, you guys, I don't understand you. Why are you pushing brush clearing on the white ranchers? Because they were pushing chain the brush, you've got to kill the brush, it's killing the grass, and the same stuff as you hear in America. We were spending masses of money out. And they said, of course we've got to do it, Alan, because of all the brush encroachment. And I said, well, why is there so much brush encroachment on the white ranches? They said, overgrazing. And I said, are you guys sure of that? Yes, our research shows it, our blah, 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 blah. There it is, PhDs written, everything. And I said, okay, you guys, you convinced me. Now, why aren't you pushing the same thing on the black farmers? And they said, because there's no brush encroachment. Why is there no brush encroachment? Overgrazing. Okay, so 6 million guys with a hell of a lot of cattle have got no brush because of overgrazing. 6,000 on the same area of land roughly have got masses of brush because of overgrazing with too few cattle. So don't you guys think you need to go back to the classroom? That was a beautiful mass experiment for us, that the main cause, overgrazing of plants on a high scale, will lead to a shift away from grass. But the main cause of woody vegetation is overrest. Now, it's not saying you won't get some woody vegetation with overgrazing of plants at a high level, but the main cause of this is overrest. And the main cause of shift to weeds tends to be overgrazing of plants. Now, those are generalizations, so they're not rules, they're just generalizations. So when you see a lot of that, you can begin to suspect, whoops, this is probably overresting. The other thing to do, and I'm just trying to think of all the tips I can give you, rather than just talk about the land, but one of the big things is do build yourself into some sort of support group. Are most of you doing that? build yourself into some sort of support group. Because in human society, the banana that leaves the bunch gets skinned. Okay? So don't leave the bunch. You'll get skinned. So have a bunch of bananas around you. Or bananas, as you call them. Okay? It's very important, because if you look at the ranches that have really succeeded, that I notice in Australia, Africa, Canada, etc., much more so than in the United States, they've banded together and supported each other. And that's made them successful, is that support they've given each other. It's terribly important. Now, for some reason here, there's been more of this Marlborough man attitude. It's not so good. Okay? So what I like to do with a rancher often is to say, okay, as you look at this, don't look at species, look at process. Now, what do I mean by process? I mean by the four processes under which this all functions. Water cycling from rain, down into the soil, back, etc., sliding down the thing. Minerals cycling, solar energy flow through from sun, through grass, weeds, plants, everything, to wildlife, livestock, people, to supporting money. The only wealth that sustains a nation comes from sunlight. Something bankers don't understand, economists don't understand, but very true. Okay, there is no other form of wealth that can sustain a nation. Okay, so think of the solar flow of energy to money, and then the biological community dynamics, the changes in the community. So if you think of those four processes, and don't worry about the species, just use your imagination. I do this a lot when I go into country. I'll just use my imagination. Kids would be good at this. And just say, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, where do I think this lies in terms of those four processes? So on a scale of 1 to 10, where would it lie? Get some friends or whatever, and then start going for it. I know at least three, and I know there are more properties now that are over 400% more carrying capacity. One of them is the ranch I'm working with a lot, and we are now, I know the ranch well because I used to own it and then I gave it away, but we are now 400% above the original stocking rate. Okay, we've had 3 bad dry years in the last 5, and because we've been putting this sort of stuff right, okay, we have now got open water a mile above where we've ever had it before. Pools with water lilies, fish eagles, ducks, a mile above where we've ever had water before, as the water cycles begun to come right. Now that's the last 5 years, 3 of them have been droughts. Now we are in a dry year now, and I'm in touch with our manager there, and we don't have the slightest concern about the lack of grass. In fact, if we could buy the cattle and we could get the money, we would be absolutely happy now to double that again, which would put us at 800%. And we don't know where the ceiling is. We're just feeling our way. But it's getting more and more and more productive. If you quote that figure at all, just quote the 400, okay? Because the reason I say that is because the original start, it was so poor that that particular ranch was poorer than the average of the district. If we take the average of the district, or if it had been better managed when I first bought it, it would have been at about double. So if we doubled now, it would bring us up to 400% above what would have been an average managed ranch. But it was buggered up when I bought it. Really bad. Yeah, many years ago. But that's pretty significant if we can go up 400%. What's that worth to most ranchers? It's like having 3 more ranches without having to buy them, isn't it? One of the big difficulties we have in getting people to understand holistic management is that it is such a paradigm shift. a way to get people to understand that is to say, to look at the question. Some people might ask, have deer here, a lot of deer on this ranch, and say, if I manage holistically, what's going to happen to my deer? Now, we only think in words. So if you were to say to me, I'm thinking of managing this holistically, but I'm worried, what's going to happen to my deer? I would just say, well, let's not do anything yet. Let's just keep training you. Why? Because that question tells me she hasn't understood holistic management. So no point in going into it. When a person understands that once they start managing holistically, the question is, what do you want to happen to your deer? Do you want to increase them? Do you want to decrease them? We'll do it. You see, it's a different question altogether. So it wouldn't be, what's this going to cost me to manage holistically? It's, well, what do you want to do? It's a totally different way of thinking, because it's just a decision-making process. So there's no way you can say, well, if I change my decision-making process, how could it cost me a lot of money? Of course it couldn't, unless you decide to spend the money. So the first thing is just learning what it's about. And so Andy would be with his family, whatever it is, whoever he decides are the decision makers, or people with veto power, so it could be his parents, and just saying, how do you want your life to be? Think deeply. How do you want your life to be? And just write it down. And wow, that's good. If you want to live a life like that, what are you going to have to produce from your resource base? Oil, gas, this ranch, whatever is in this hole. What are you going to have to produce? And it's not money. It's, if part of your quality of life is that you want to be prosperous, then it'll be profit. You'll have to produce profit. So you're not going to take any decision here that's not profitable after this, because you're going to be working towards this, so it'll be profit. And if part of your desire for your family is to be secure, we'd have to say, well, what do you mean? Do you mean financial security? Okay, you do mean that. All right, that means a lot of profit. Now, let's come back to your word security. The more money you have, the more insecure you're going to be, physically. The most insecure people in the world are the rich. They're not the poor. It's the people with more to lose. Okay, so we have to talk. What do you really mean by security? Well, I mean my physical security in this community. Okay, then we need to know that. And it may be leisure time with your family. So it's profit, it's security, it's leisure time. And then the final piece of it, and most of you know this, it would be two parts to it, really, would be the land. And now we'd be back to our imagination. And what must this land look like 100, 200 years from now if his family is still enjoying that life? So get out of species, don't describe species, describe process, and describe this land as healthy, soft, vibrant, blah, blah, blah. And then what about behavior? Andy and his wife have got to, and his family have got to deal with people. So if you want people to be totally loyal to you, they'll come to your help day or night, okay? How are you going to have to behave? You and your family, how are you going to have to behave?
Take care of everyone else.
You're going to have to describe it. Totally honest? Are there degrees of honesty? Or is it like pregnancy? Okay? There's only honest. There's no degrees of it. So you're going to have to be honest. You're going to have to be caring, good attitude, to your neighbors, etc. And that, once he's got that, he and his family, and that means more to them than anything in life. The rest will flow. The rest will flow. But if they don't form that, and it doesn't mean more than anything in life, the rest will be difficult, and you'll struggle, and you'll battle, and you'll say it's too difficult, and you'll give up, and you'll go to the coffee shop and bitch about the government and the weather, and join the other ranchers. But if you get really determined about that holistic goal, that's it. And then you'd come to this land, and what would you do? One of the first decisions you'd have to make is run animals, isn't it? Now, what if his family didn't have oil, gas, anything else? What if they only had this bit of land? Or what if they said, no, the oil and gas is all going to other investments and security. We're going to develop this from the solar energy right here. So what would you do? If they didn't even have money to buy cattle, what would you do?
Call your neighbors and have them bring some cattle.
Yeah. Correct. You'd call your neighbors and sit and brainstorm or whatever and say, okay, I can lease out the grazing. Now, if I'm going to lease out the grazing, would I just let the cattle run anywhere? No, because they'll overgraze plants and you'll continue to rest the land. You've got two things to cure here. So you'd be saying, all right, I'm going to lease the grazing to you. I want you to put on X number of cattle. We'll work it out together. But I do insist on this planning process. Okay? Now, he hasn't got the money for fencing. Where's the fencing going to come from? Assuming we're going to do it with fencing. Where's the fencing money going to come from? From the lease. Now, this that I'm talking to you about now, okay, this was the one part of the charter trials run in Rhodesia in the 60s. Because I said you can double your stocking rate, you don't even have to spend money, you can generate the money from the land. We did an 8-year trial, and the trial came out more profitable every year. We just generated the money just like we're talking of, like this, generated from the land. Okay, now if you thought in terms of energy flow for a moment, solar energy flow. Now, we're at the wrong time of the year, but when these plants are green, again, do you see this, the link to the water cycle? When majority of the plants are narrow-leafed, are they going to catch much sunlight? No, they're not. And when they are what they call xerophytic, dry type, or hydrophytic, wet type, that means waxy cuticles, narrow leaves, or like a prickly pear, a waxy coating on it. All those plants adapted to either too little water or too much water have similarities, and one of their similarities is a slow growth rate. And if we can get better types of plants, more mesophytic in the middle, they're not really here, but you know, with broader leaves, a characteristic of those is rapid growth rates. So in a given time, you can put on more production. Okay, so as we look at this from a solar energy flow, automatically you start saying, well, this is below 5 too. And it's no surprise if you go to the mineral cycle, you go to each one of them because they're linked. We're really looking in, and you've all heard this, I'm sure, we're looking into the same room through 4 windows. Water cycle, mineral cycle, community dynamics, or solar energy flow. So that's a useful way, and if you can think like that, if this was Andy, I'd just be saying, okay, Andy, we've got a long way to go here. This could be a hell of a lot more productive. A lot better for wildlife, a lot better for cattle. So now you know you've got something to build towards, instead of just saying, well, this is what we've got and it can't get any better, and you know. We have a situation today where we've had so many centuries of land deteriorating. Okay, the early pioneers and the amount of game they described in this country, if you read their stuff carefully, all the clues are there to terrible deterioration. Okay, they were seeing a remnant of what had been in this country. Remember that most of the game, what was it, something like 80% of the large mammals, genera, not species, were killed out about 9,000 years ago. So when these soils and everything here evolved, they had animal life on them unimaginable today. Okay? So because of that and all the centuries of it and what we inherit today, we tend to only be able to see or think or imagine with what we're seeing. And I've spoken to young people in my own country about the elephants and the buffalo and the tall grass and everything that existed in one part of our country, and I'm talking to young people, 20s, 30s, etc., and it's like science fiction to them. They have grown up with bare ground for 100 miles around their kraals and so on. So it's totally inconceivable that that change occurred in my lifetime. you cannot overgraze a range. So you will hear people talk about that overgrazed range. The moment you hear that, bullshit. You cannot overgraze a range. The only thing you can overgraze is a plant. So you need to think of plants when you're thinking of overgrazing or grazing. Now, overgrazing, I think you know, occurs when a plant is defoliated while it's growing, okay? It then mobilizes energy from the base, from the stem base, from the crown, from the roots, depending on the particular species, and it mobilizes energy to push up leaf, because it can't grow leaf without energy from sunlight. It originally got it from the seed, and after that it's getting it from the sun. So it's got to bring energy up to grow. Now, if the animals are still around and that plant is bitten again, that is overgrazing of that plant. Now, if that persists, it can kill the plant, it can cause the plant to distort, it can reduce the yield of that plant. There are various things. Now, some plants are very sensitive, they die out quickly. Some are very resistant to overgrazing and they distort and grow below the grazing height. There's all sorts of mechanisms that go on, but the principle is always the same. Too frequent defoliations without letting the plant restore root. Okay, so that will be going on when your animals are on the land. Now, for that, really the rules are terribly simple. Anywhere in the world almost, it's very hard to overgraze plants in under 3 days. That's it. Isn't that simple? So if you can keep animals for something less than 3 days on that land, you're not likely to overgraze any plants during the grazing period while the animals are there. Now, those animals have to go somewhere. So on your planning, those animals are going somewhere, and at some point they have to come back here. Now, if they come back here before that plant has recovered and regrown its roots, what will happen to that plant? It'll be overgrazed. So you've got two ways of overgrazing. You can overgraze because you kept the animals there too long, or you can overgraze because you kept them there a short time but you brought them back too soon. So that you plan on your planning. And you plan the recovery periods, that's what you need to watch. And if you can get up to herding, like we are on the ranch that I'm working with in Africa, we have 1,000 paddocks because we're herding. We've got 2,000 paddocks, we've got unlimited, it's virtual paddocks. Okay, do you think we have to worry about the grazing period? Just tell the herders, hey, never have those cattle more than 3 days. That's it. When do we come back? Well, we're not usually back there 6 to 9 months. That's it. It's simple. So we're not worrying about overgrazing on that ranch. But if this was thick like this, and it was my ranch, say I was Andy here, and I had a herd of 2,000 head of cattle, you won't on this size maybe initially, but let's say I had it, I would be beginning to break this up prior to clearing it. Let's say I wanted this to be open parkland, I would begin to clear this up with the cattle by just getting more grass growing in there. Now, how would I do it? The sort of techniques we've used are to come up to this with a pickup and ram it in there and lob as far as you can just blocks of molasses urea cubes just cut into quarters. So the cattle can smell it in there, and 2,000 head of cattle start just bringing in, opening it up, and grass starts growing. Just start to open it up. That's all more increase in production. But ultimately, when they're like this and heavy wood, no, you've got to clear them with something. So then you're going to ring bark or chain or poison or whatever is suitable for you. But at some point, if you don't want that woody vegetation, you're going to have to clear it. The big thing is just not to clear it when it's costing you money. Clear it when it makes money. Do you know what I'm saying there? You know, some of the things we could discuss here, I feel I'm almost insulting your intelligence. Why has the grassland given way to weeds and brush and everything like this? If you rest grasslands in any environment, they tend to go to brush, to woody, weedy, brush, whatever. Grassland gives way. The only exceptions to that I know of are where there's a soil factor, something maybe the shallowness of the soil or some factor in the soil that limits it and keeps it at grassland. But otherwise, basically, grasslands need animals. And if you protect them from animals, as we do, they give way and go to brush. As I visit so many ranchers who, bless them, are absolutely happy with what they're doing. And that's okay for them. But I know if it was my ranch, I could push it twice as far. Okay? So many ranchers get started, plan their grazing, okay, go to training, plan their grazing. As they begin to move their animals, they stop overgrazing plants. Okay? You get an improvement of the land if you stop overgrazing plants, but they do not stop the partial rest, the excessive resting of the land. So you get an improvement and then it plateaus and just stays like that. Now the ranches that I'm talking about, the one I've just talked about, 400%, when it started to plateau like that, we just kicked it up again, further, 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 further. Because we stopped the rest. We'd stopped the overgrazing of plants long ago. Overgrazing of plants isn't the problem. Why is this land like this? Why is this land not as good as it could be? Not enough animals. Yeah. There aren't enough animals here to keep this healthy. Several times in the last 2 or 3 years, since I gave up my plane, I've been driving from Albuquerque to the West Ranch, and that's a long way, and I've just made a habit of counting the cattle I see, and it has averaged 35. That's from Albuquerque to between Midland and Del Rio, you know, where the place is. That's a long, long way, and on average you see about 35 head of cattle. There are almost no cattle left in Texas. They're all in feedlots. And that's critical for your water, for your profitability, your stability, everything. And when I first came to Texas, you guys had spent millions of dollars clearing mesquite and brush, and I see you still doing it. 30 years later, they're still doing it. What's that definition of insanity? It's something like $300 million we spend every year in the United States killing weeds, brush, noxious plants, and we do it year after year after year after year after year. We just keep doing it. What could we do if we took 300 million and put it into adult education? What would that do? It'd change the whole situation around. Now, if you were doing this, and let's say it was Andy and he was managing this holistically, and let's say that when he formed his holistic goal, he said, all right, I'll just get started for the first year or two. Just get the ball rolling, get the leases done, etc. Now, fairly soon, on a ranch, he'll want to map the land. Okay, and that's not done when you're doing the holistic goal, but after a year or two, when you feel comfortable that you really know the ranch well, then what I'd like to get people doing is mapping that land and saying, all right, here's an aerial photograph or whatever it is, and in the future, I don't want all this thick brush. So in some of the more productive areas, this brush has got too thick to deal with animals, okay? I want this clear, and I want this to be an open parkland effect, so it'll be mapped there. And then there'll be other areas where I want thick brush for the deer and for cover. And I don't want any of this Texas style in long strips of brush clearing, because I want maximum edge effect. And where do you get the maximum edge effect? With straight lines or with a jigsaw puzzle? Jigsaw puzzle. So I want this in a jigsaw puzzle where there's patches of bush, patches of cover, etc. And you'll just map that out. And there may be a badly gulling, eroding pit through the farm. Okay, but 100 years from now, 50 years from now, that's going to be a series of ponds and bass and fish or whatever. Just map that out. Because if it's mapped now, it gives you every year something to work towards, and not haphazardly doing various things. So you would just progress, Andy, like we're talking of, get that holistic goal, maybe lease grazing. You may decide to invest from the oil, whatever, and you start to build up. You're comfortable with it. Your planned grazing is working. But the main thing you're trying to do is to remove the cause of that. That is there because you had too much rest. Okay? Now, when you're absolutely happy you've overcome the rest problem, like Graham was talking of, that those people are doing, when you're happy you've overcome that, okay, and no grass is oxidizing or getting damaged by rest, etc., now is the time when you would test the decision to clear that. Now, if it's a big ranch, what I always say to people is, look, you intuitively know that things are coming right, you're monitoring, you're assuming you're wrong, it's coming right, you know you're getting towards where you might want to clear that, now jump ahead. So I would say, okay, I reckon in about 2 to 3 years' time I'll be ready to do something about that. Okay, now I jump ahead and I just do what I call look-see trials. Forget bloody replications, you're not a researcher. Forget all that crap, okay? And just take blocks of your land and talk to experts and others and get their opinion. How would you clear this? What do you do in Texas? Use bulldozers? Do you use chains? Do you use chemicals? Whatever. Just find out from and talk to neighbors. What have you done? And you might clear one patch of 50 acres one way, another a different way, the way where you're wanting it cleared, and then keep on with your planned grazing and everything and just see what happens. Did that come back rapidly to brush? If so, hold off. Don't do any more until you really get on top of the problem. If it didn't rapidly come back to brush, okay, I'm comfortable now to keep doing more of that. Do you see how it's just common sense? Just common sense. Step by step doing what you want. And you're 100% in charge. It's nobody else's holistic goal. And if somebody comes and says you're not managing holistically properly, tell them where to go. It's yours. I stress that because so many people seem to worry about what others think, instead of just looking after their own family, their own life. One of the things I look at commonly first is water cycle, because you're all aware of how important the rain is to you. And I will often say to a rancher, what would you pay me if I could double your rainfall? And they'll say, God, that is worth so much, I can't imagine it. Do you know it's easy to do? Just double the effectiveness. It's easy to do. It doesn't even cost money to do it. You make money doing it, if you can just change the thinking. Right? So on water cycle, I'd be looking at this and saying, on a scale of 1 to 10, where do I think this is? And as you gain experience, you'll do it better and better. But let's just take a wild guess first before we talk. Each one of you, on 1 to 10, where would you put the water cycle effectiveness on this land? Above 5, below 5? Below 5? Okay, that's probably good enough. Isn't that telling you you've got a tremendous lot of room for improvement? Now, here in Texas, I have talked about doubling the stocking rate, and I've had people with PhDs invoking God against me and saying, this is what God gave us and you can't do any better. That's not the way to think. Use your imagination, okay? So water cycle, we could go a lot better. I would agree with you that it's low, and what are the clues I'm looking for? I usually go barefoot. When people got their damn cameras, I put my shoes on. If you saw that film last night, they caught me barefoot a few times. You feel a bit like a hooligan. But I like to be barefoot and hunt barefoot and everything. And you can feel through your feet the hardness of this ground. You can feel it. When you walk at home on your carpet, you don't have to be told you're on the carpet. When you walk onto the concrete, you don't have to be told, you feel it. If you're used to walking barefoot, you can feel the ground. And when it's soft, water soaks in. When it's hard, this is hard, water doesn't soak in well. And for the water to be effective, you've got to have air and water. And so when I look at it and I see the plants, and I'll just narrow-leafed like this, and I see a lot of narrow-leaf plants, that's telling me that there's not a good balance of air and water in the soil. So that alone is telling me, from a water cycle point of view, this could be much more effective if I could get air into the soil and water. Because if you get too much water in without the air, you get narrow-leaf plants that grow very slowly. They're not very productive. If you get too much air in and not enough water, you get narrow-leaf plants. You've got to try and get a balance between them, and usually it means a spongy, nice crumb structure. Gardeners know this, don't they? Yeah, so rather than going and taking, say, range management at college, go and join the old ladies in tennis shoes at the garden club. You'll actually learn better stuff. I'm joking, but there's many a true word spoken in jest. You see how narrow-leafed it is? Yeah.
I do see that.
And that's a perennial. That's probably several years old, so it doesn't matter what time. But your point is good. If you come at the wrong time, and there may be something there, but when you're looking at perennials, now I'm seeing this is narrow-leafed, narrow-leafed, narrow-leafed. So I'm seeing a lot of that, and that would just tell me, okay, I can make a lot of improvement here. That's it, as simple as that. And then, okay, if we left water cycle for a moment, well, you can also see the cutting of the gully on the edge. You can see the hard soil as you came up. If you left water cycle for a moment and, well, before I leave it, is that clear what we were saying? And just how simple it is, that even without experience of this land, you can see that it can be at least 100% better. On the brittleness scale, you're all familiar with the brittleness scale? I think it's an important one just to have roughly in your minds. Where would you place this land? Let's say 5's about the middle, 10 is very brittle, 1 is non-brittle. So would this be below 5 or above 5?
7.
Walt? 6 or 7? 6 or 7? Okay. So somewhere a little bit above the middle? Yeah. And it's not a big deal if you're wrong. Would it matter if I said, well, I think it's probably about 4? It's not a big deal. You just need to know you're in about the middle. Okay, clues. What do you think about the plant spacing here?
Pretty close.
Pretty close. Okay? Now remember, plant spacing is a function of animal behavior when you get into the very brittle, and as you get to the other end, plant spacing is a function of climate. Okay? You know you've got very few animals here. You're seeing this go to woodland because of the lack of animals, but you're seeing close plant spacing. So that's giving you a clue that the climate's pretty kind to you here. This is not a very harsh place to manage. It's a great tip for you. So, Andy, there's a clue for you. This is relatively easy to manage. You've got natural plant spacing that's close, not produced by animal behavior. Now, if we'd been at 8 on that scale, the plants would have been wide. With this lack of animals, you'd have had big bare spaces between them. Okay, so those are clues you can pick up very easily, and they matter. And then the other clue I picked up, if you look on the trees, do you see the lichen? If you've got enough moisture for lichen to grow on the trees, that usually tallies with close plant spacing. Okay, that's telling you that even without me seeing your rainfall record, the vegetation is telling me you get quite a lot of misty weather, etc. That's telling me that. So try to get observant about these things and have fun. Tease each other, challenge each other, have fun doing it. If you make it competitive and fun, you learn more. You really do. Don't worry about being wrong. Nobody is going to screw up more than I have. And almost everything I've learnt has been from what I did wrong. So just have fun with those sort of things.